And this is Ed. I'm here in San Diego, but actually I'm up in space, as you could see, looking down on the good Earth. This is Global TV Talk Show, a unit of Global Business News TV Network, which now includes YouTube, LinkedIn, and all kinds of social media connections. A very special guest today, as you could see, is diverse and beautiful and smart. Tatiana St. Germain is coming to us from Orlando. Welcome again, Tatiana.
Good morning.
And you're very much into new leadership and assessment, right?
Yes, I'm an assessment expert and talent advisor and executive coach.
And do you work around the clock? It sounds like you're neck deep in projects every day.
Just as I recommend all of my coaching clients, you have to be kind to yourself and you have to create a good balance between work and life.
Okay, so Stephen Howard, author of 23 books, and so how do you manage sleep?
I don't need a lot of it. I get 5.5 hours. I've done that in my entire life. So, but I will admit, I will often take a 20-minute power nap every afternoon between 4 and 5 if I can. So that kind of helps me.
Oh, that gets you into the evening.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Do you have a slide you want to show right now of one or two of your books?
I think I can pull one or two up. Let me see what I did here.
Okay. So one of them I'm just going to announce briefly, and you'll take over much better than me, is all about humany. Of course, you coined the word, and humany is a mixture of harmony and something else.
It's a mixture. Yeah, I created it. It's a mixture of humanity, and harmony. And used in the book you see on your screen, Humanity Leadership, is to focus on the fact that as leaders, we lead human beings. We don't lead assets. We don't lead resources. We don't lead head counts. We lead human beings. And so focusing on that, coming out of the pandemic, a new way of thinking about how you lead people, and also the importance of creating workplaces of well-being and harmony. So that's how I created the word.
And you've partnered recently with our mutual friend Ali Shami on how to successfully partner with American companies and American business people. And when you can, show that slide and tell us a little bit about the background of why that book has become so hot on Amazon, and it was not written basically, I guess, for Americans, but for Europeans and others who want to do more business with U.S. companies.
Exactly right, Ed. I mean, Ali was born in Lebanon, moved to the United States, I think around age 20. So he spent his adult life in the United States, kind of as an expatriate and as a citizen. And I left the United States when I was 23, and I've spent most of my adult life living outside the United States, in Asia, Australia, Mexico. And so we have, from different perspectives and different experiences, we have similar thoughts about how things go wrong when U.S. companies work with, and that's the phrase, U.S. companies want to work with overseas companies, and overseas companies want to partner with U.S. companies. So even that's a different perspective. So that's how the book came about. And it really talks about the American business culture and things that people need to take into consideration when dealing with Americans.
Okay, so now show that cover, because we're not seeing the cover right now. We're seeing something else.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was. Okay, let me see if I can get that back.
Okay, good. Yeah, because the cover is self-explanatory and very interesting the way it's done. So you can see it looks like a jigsaw puzzle in the background.
Right.
And why don't you explain to our friends here about how that came about?
Well, I use a graphic artist in Mexico City for the book covers for my books. And also, as you know, I help other people bring their books to market. I edit them, I publish them for them. So I use this graphic artist. And in the briefing session, we sat down and in Mexico City with tacos and beer, and talked about what the book was going to be all about. And he said, "Oh, I can't wait to read this book." I said, "Why?" He said, "I find Americans very puzzling to work with." And so I said, "Well, that's a good concept. Run with that." And so he created this jigsaw puzzle concept here and so the concept is we kind of put the pieces together to explain again, like Americans, it's very important for most Americans to be on time, to be punctual. Whereas in other cultures, I mean, meetings will start 20 minutes late, 25 minutes late, 30 minutes late, and that's very frustrating for Americans. And therefore, they don't necessarily want to partner with people who don't respect the American concept that time is money. So that's just one area that we talk about in the book, the fact that if you want to have successful partnerships with an American business person, you need to understand what's going to drive them crazy and understand what they will appreciate in the partnership.
Okay, thank you very much, and glad to have you on the show, and that's really interesting. Paul Falcone, thank you very much for being on the show so many times. I really love what you do, and I love your presence here. So you've got so many books out there, Harper Collins, Leadership, and all kinds of kudos. I just want to read this, and I'd like you to go deeper, okay? Your book on managerial ethics in employee relations, a top priority of Gen Y, Gen Z, working for an ethical company, blah, blah, blah. So people want to be coached. They want to be developed, especially the younger kids, right? Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll start with something really important. The 6 people on this call are like my 6 favorite people in the world. Just saying, just saying, we're all friends. Some of us go back decades. Some of us, we met through you, Ed, but I'll tell you what, coming here is just, I just feel so fortunate to be invited. So thank you for that. That book on ethics, which is interesting. I've taught the class on ethics at UCLA Extension in the School of Business and Management, taught it for years. It's one of those mandatory, you got to take that class as this like 5 core classes you must take. That's one of them out of the 9 courses to get your certification in HR management. And the funny thing is there's no book on it. And so I pulled together articles and whatnot, but I've said one of these days I'm going to write a book on that. So when HarperCollins asked me to write that new 5-book series, the Workplace Leadership series, I said, I want to make one of them on workplace ethics and creating and sustaining a moral workplace. And they loved the idea. But to your point, Ed, what you just read, when you poll the Gen Y and Gen Z, the 4,500 and the 2,500 crowds, working for an ethical employer is at the top of the list. It seems to get short shrift out there. I don't know why it doesn't resonate. It needs to resonate. And I think it will over time, because you want to be the kind of leader and you want to create a culture and you want to be part of an organization that is identified as ethical and moral. And, what are the priorities? They want corporate sustainability, right? They want to make the world a better place. They want work-life family balance. They want career and professional development. These are noble things. These are not bad things. I wanted them too, and I'm a boomer. It's just our generation wasn't studied as much as these younger generational cohorts are. So they didn't know as much about what the boomers were looking for or the Gen Xers. But get to Gen Y and Gen Z, they've polled them. They know what they're looking for. So a wise employer is going to say, hey, if this is a real value, if this is a priority to large swaths of the workforce, how do we build that into our company and how do we make that part of our DNA? That's really what the book was about.
Paul, let me ask you about growing talent, almost like an agricultural approach, in my words, of planting the seeds, planting, watering, cultivating, loving your veggies or whatever's going to grow out of the ground. But let's talk about talent. It seems like there's millions and millions of Gen Z, not to mention millennials and us older people. But you wrote that there's a shortage of what? Qualified people, or just a shortage of trained people, or an actual shortage of labor?
An actual shortage of labor, Ed. And this is in all the industrialized countries. It's not just in the United States. But when you look across the world, it's like China had that one-child policy in place for way too long. They now have a 30-year infrastructure plan with Africa. So at least they have an idea of where they're going to get human capital over the generations. Japan has 125 million residents right now. It's going to be down to 88 million by 2050. The average age is going to be over 65. North Korea has the lowest birth rate on the planet. I mean, again, the world just hit 8 billion human beings in late 2022. That was a whole new change. That was the first time the world has ever hit that number. The world has literally doubled since I've been born. There were 4 billion when I was born. There's now 8 billion on the planet, but they're not being born into the industrialized nations. They're being born into nations that are underdeveloped, where they don't have Social Security. So parents have to have multiple children to ensure someone's there to take care of them when they get older and they can no longer work and sustain themselves. So the reality becomes you have to think of this longer term as a company, as a nation. We have to know how to grow talent. We can't just consume talent. In human resources, throughout my career, we've talked about talent acquisition, right? Which is what Gary does as an executive recruiter. That's always going to be there. There's always going to be a need, but you need to change your perspective a bit to talent development. You have to know how to grow your own. And the degree to which you can teach managers how to grow talent and build your own teams and build your own leaders, that's going to be a massive profit lever for companies that can do that. It's a really, 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 really important skill for the long term.
So the first-time manager, you're a specialist in this year and forever, I'm sure. But this is ground zero then, isn't it?
Yeah, HarperCollins has a first-time manager book, and they're building out a series underneath it. So I wrote the first-time manager HR. I wrote the first-time manager leading through crisis. There's going to be a book. There's a book, first-time manager sales. They're going to hopefully build that out for marketing and finance and IT. It's a new group of books. But the reality is you got to start young, right? Look at the ones who are high potential employees. Look at the ones who are emerging leaders. Build a pathway to get them into management. And then talk about where is the stopgap? Where does it choke off? Where do you stop promoting people in your organization? Do you have a hard time getting them to the manager level, to the director level, to the VP level? Once you can identify where it starts to choke off, you now know where your delta is. That's your gap. And now you can start building plans to get people the experience that they need and the education they need to fill those jobs when they open up.
Okay, so here we are, bringing this conversation along. You're growing talent, you're loving talent, and you're creating a fuzzy, warm feeling, caring feeling within whether they're remote or in the office. You got to figure out how to do that remotely. And then there's a guy, Gary Sanger, who's sort of circling around and going to pluck up those people and take them away from you and put them somewhere else for getting a huge commission. So that survival of the fittest here. So we're all friends here. So how do you protect that homegrown talent from Gary?
I don't protect them from Gary. I refer them to Gary. Gary and I go back a long way. No, but the idea, Ed, is this. I think it was Richard Branson, who said, train your people well enough that they can excel in their careers, but treat them so that they won't want to leave, or something along those lines. It's got to be both. It's not an either or. There's always going to be a healthy place for turnover. You don't want to have 100% retention. You need fresh ideas. You need to have some level of churn. When it becomes excessive, it's a problem. You've got to look at your leadership practices. But the reality is, as long as people feel like they've got a strong relationship with their manager, because that's the bar that no one can cry. If you got a strong relationship with your manager, there's trust, respect, there's like in that relationship, and that's how you describe it. You're not going anywhere for 20% or 30%. It's not worth it. You might end up with someone who throws fire, throws chairs and spits fire. You don't want to take that risk. Yet at the same time, they also have to feel like they're in a learning curve, right? The career and professional development is a broad idea, but people want to feel like they're making a difference at work. They're adding bullets to their resumes, their LinkedIn profiles, and they're kind of at the top of Maslow's hierarchy, right? They're fully engaged in what they're doing, and they're knocking it out of the park. Anyone is going to feel great about themselves when they feel like their boss has their back and they're learning new things. It's a simple combination. Again, as a smart business owner, as a smart senior corporate executive, figure out that simple litmus test, that little prism. Do they feel like they can do their best work every day with peace of mind? And that's going to come from their relationship with their boss. And that's going to come from them being in a learning curve. And how do your people rate themselves in that area? That's going to tell you what your retention is going to look like and what your turnover is going to look like.
Gary?
I knew you were going to call Gary next. I knew that.
Oh, he's looking at me.
Well, the theme here is leadership. And so as we think of that leader, that guy or gal that's in the corner office, what are they spending their time on? What are they paying attention to? And we've each seen clients, and we've probably worked for people that the business didn't know what business they're in. So if you raise this up 50,000 feet and you ask that fourth grade question, what business are we in? What customers are we trying to serve? What are we doing for those customers? Are we really in some advanced technology that's helping them? Or are we in legacy stuff that hasn't changed for 20 years? So in thinking about the business, thinking about who of your execs, who of your teams give the most value to that enterprise, who does not. I mean, in the idea of me circling overhead and picking companies whereby we're going to take talent out of, that's true. And we then, because we have a client, they have a specific opening, they have a specific level, they have specific things they want done in that first 90 days, first 2 years. We're going to get target companies, target industries where we're going to go find those folks. And who takes my call? Most of them do, because we're sworn to confidentiality. We're sworn to keeping the client we're serving confidential in most of the cases. You, the candidate, can talk to me in confidence because I'm not going to blow your cover. Your boss isn't going to find out you're looking, which many times if you are, that can be fatal. A couple of the first things that cause them to say, hey, let me get my door. My boss is a jerk. Typically, those first comments, Paul, right on. The boss isn't really acting like a boss. They're not keeping in the loop. The second piece is usually I'm not being developed. I don't have promotional opportunities in front of me. I mean, that's a big deal. And third, oftentimes, is comp, even though comp oftentimes gets talked about the most. So you, the boss, you ought to show some love and appreciation for your stars, your top 10, 20%. Make sure they know that they're being appreciated. You ought to pay extra if you really need them as critical members of your team. And sometimes a simple rotation. If you got 7 executives, what would happen for 90 days if you rotated 6 of them? I mean, it's unheard of, right? But he or she, that boss that really thinks the cohesiveness, the development, and the staff person could become a line person and vice versa. Those are the areas. Those are absolutely the areas. And so leadership, I really think about where you're spending your time on behalf of what the enterprise needs, not just what you're best at, right? Not just what you're best at. And I mean, a pet peeve of mine, and I'll close this part of it up. How many hours do I spend? How many flights have I been on? How hard am I working? Excuse me, ma'am. Excuse me, sir. I frankly don't care. What are you getting done? Don't do the pity party in terms of how darn hard I'm working, because that usually means the work-life balance is out of hand. Eve, what do you think of all this?
I think you're spot on. And I think that there's executives out there that are blindsided. And I think that there's a lot of arrogance and maybe ignorance along the way, that they think that they're doing a good job. They think that their company loves them. They think that their people love them, but they're mistaken. And so I think what you're saying is true. Get management by walking around, get out there, talk to your people, do surveys, humble yourself and go get an executive coach. Like, I'm sure that Tatiana would have some good ideas about that, and perhaps Paul as well. And that will create a healthy culture. Don't assume anything. Don't assume that your company and your people love you. you might be surprised at the undertones and the undercurrents within the organization.
Tatiana?
I love the analogy that you started with. I call it the leadership garden. All right, you have to plant the right seeds. As an assessment expert, employee assessment expert, I really focus on job fit. So many of the things that we've discussed here about growing talent and about retaining talent, promoting people, really stems from job fit. Fit with the job, fit with the team, fit with the manager, fit with the organizational culture. Because if you think about it, as a leader, you might be seduced by a beautiful palm tree you want to plant in your courtyard, and you don't care that you live in Canada. Well, if you nurture that palm tree and take care of it, it's still a palm tree. So when Gary comes along and says, "Hey, Mr. Palm Tree, I've got a great opportunity in Orlando, Florida. Would you like to try it out?" All of a sudden, it's like, wow, that's a much better fit for me, no matter what the organization up in Canada did. So it really starts with the fit, and we cannot underestimate the importance of that. This is where, Stephen, also the puzzle piece is close to my heart, because every person, when we hire them, they need to fit that the puzzle, the gap that we're looking to fill with individuals. And this is where talent assessments come in. Every organization needs to know what success looks like and who are we bringing along. And then we put them in we get the right seeds, put them in the right soil, and we know how to have meaningful conversations with them because we know what makes them tick. We know their strengths, we know their weaknesses and quirks of personality. And based on that, we can create career paths, nurture and grow them.
Eve, you're basically doing the same thing as Gary, but for more of a controlled group.
I kind of do two things. So yes, I have a company that does what Gary does, and there's the other organization called Band of Hands, where it's very different from executive level recruiting, and Band of Hands simply becomes the employer of record for small businesses employees. So again, you are free to be the leader that you need to be. In a small business, everybody does everything, and people hate doing employment stuff, especially since you're in San Diego, especially in the state of California, Ed, where the laws change all the time, and they love to chase you down to make sure that you are following the laws, because if you're not, guess what they get? Money, and that's what California needs. So the Band of Hands concept is really to become the employer of record and allow you to be the leader that you were meant to be, and go out and get more business, increase your profits, etc.
So do you deal with, if I may jump in, do you deal with doctors, dentists, lawyers, as well as retailers, manufacturers?
Yes, because our service is ubiquitous, we can tackle any type of industry. And I think the dentist, especially, we were speaking with a dentist who has 5 locations and he wants to open a lot more. And this is the bane of his existence, is his employees. People call in late, or they don't call in at all. They have arguments internally. They talk about like harassment issues and things like that. He doesn't have time for that. And he doesn't have the money to afford a full-time HR staff to take care of it for him. And that's where a company like Band of Hands comes along and offloads all of that.
Yeah, so that's interesting, because I know a dentist, it's a woman dentist, very successful for a number of years. She's in Glendale, and she doesn't, well, she essentially doesn't own the practice anymore. She sold it to this group that buys up medical practices, and so the doctor or the dentist is just free to practice medicine and not run a business. So that's essentially what I'm hearing. Is that correct?
Yeah, offload all that stress of having to do what you don't want to do. Nobody got into business to handle HR claims. Nobody. Nobody, right? And so we are very popular in the franchise world, where anybody who's never been a business owner before, anybody, you could be a retired nurse, a retired firefighter, and buy a franchise, and you're tasked with doing the most difficult, most dangerous thing, and that's being an employer anywhere in the US. And so we take all of that burden off of their shoulders and allow them to be very successful in their practice. But I think going back to leadership too, I think there's a value, and I think there's definitely a piece missing that everybody on this call represents, and that's for Band of Hands as an organization to offer leadership, to offer classes, to offer opportunities for them to grow in their practice. And I think that that's definitely something that is missing in the small business American culture, because they're so busy trying to do the minutia of business. So I think there's definitely an opportunity for synergy with everyone on this call to help the small business in America, which 98% of all business owners in America are small. And so there's an opportunity there to help them in mass. Dale Carnegie says it's better to earn a little on a lot than a lot on a little. And so if we could figure out a way to help coach these small business owners who cannot afford a $30,000 a year executive coach, we could figure out a way to help them. I think American business owners would be a lot stronger, and America's businesses would be a lot stronger.
So, Stephen, it sounds like it's a new book, right?
That'll be number 30 if I get around to it.
So, who do you offload your work to?
Who, me?
Yeah. Well, you just do it yourself, right?
I just do it myself. I decided years ago that I didn't want to build a business. I built a company. The company is me. I didn't want, and Eve, I just wrote that quote down. Nobody starts a business wanting to run an HR program. I love that.
Thanks, no extra charge.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so the way I operate, the way Hollywood studios operate to an extent, in that I bring people in on a project. Much like a Hollywood studio will bring in a director and producers and actors and gaffers and filmmakers and everything else. And once the project's finished, everyone disbands and goes off onto another project, or the studio brings them back again. So I have people I bring back in for projects, for project management, for coaching, facilitation. And when we finish a project, we disband, stay friends, and hopefully another project comes along.
So does that go for screenwriters also?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Well, yes, because there's two aspects to screenwriting, and I think probably Paul knows more about this than I do. Actually, I only know it because my father wrote some screenplays, and so there's the independent writer who develops a screenplay and then sells it, gets an agent to sell it to a studio, and then there's others who, particularly for TV shows, who are on staff, and they're scripting out multiple episodes of a series, plotting, characterization, all that, and they're on staff, or they're again contract hires for a project, and when that series finishes, they disband and go somewhere else. Is that right, Paul?
Stephen, you nailed it. I'm taking notes. That was really good. I like that. That's good.
Well, I'm on my third cup of coffee, so I'm pretty good.
So, speaking of coffee, I've been a black coffee drinker for a very long time, but recently, after the second cup from the same pot, it tastes different. So I put a little sweetener in it, and it's like, wow, it's another boost. So, Tatiana, what would be the sweetener after hearing all these people talk about this topic of talent? What's your sweetener to make it energize you?
What energizes me is growing leaders. So we talked about growing talents, now talking about growing leaders, and it's exciting. It's an exciting idea, Eve, you're talking about. Even as an executive coach, I typically coach C-suite executives, but more and more I get asked to coach functional leaders and emerging leaders as well, because there's a tremendous shortage of those of the leaders that are going through the pipeline, and they don't know what they don't know. Like you said, they need to learn to be self-aware. They need to learn to be resilient, and I find that that's going to be the marker for leadership of the future, really, because there's so much change, and change is exponential. with technological advancements and everything else that we're facing. And they will need to pivot fast. They need to focus on what they can control. They need to trust their inner wisdom to move forward. They need to avoid being distracted by the things they cannot control. And they have to be supreme communicators. Supreme communicators. And communication, I know, is a huge topic. And of course, it includes two big components: is what you hear and what you say, what you assumed and what you actually heard. So there's a lot that we can help emerging leaders and very, very well-established leaders as well. As Paul knows, when we collaborate on some of those coaching assignments, it's really quite remarkable. It almost doesn't matter how much experience a leader has. Everyone has blind spots.
So Tatiana, when you do assessments, that starts before onboarding, doesn't it?
On the hiring side, yeah, if this is part of the promotion or interviewing process, selection process, yes, you want to assess an individual, understand what makes them tick, essentially, what talents, potential they bring to the table, what motivates them, and then we want to see if that aligns with the position we're putting them in. This ensures a win-win. A win for the company because this individual is going to ramp up and hit the ground running pretty quickly. But also, to some of the points that were made earlier, people are fully engaged in winning. In fact, I've never met anyone fully engaged in losing. Everyone wants to make a difference. We want to get into a job and start winning fast. And when you actually fit the job, we can ensure that that's the case. And then on the promotion side, again, before the interview, you want to run the assessment. It provides interview questions and coaching comments. And then other assessments that we use are designed for leadership feedback. As we were talking earlier, leaders don't know what they don't know. So there's some 360 reviews, leadership DNA evaluations to understand that unique leadership style, your approach to leading people, and what are the strengths and weaknesses associated with it.
This is really great. So we're at about the halfway mark here. If we could focus for a moment, I'd like your opinion. As I think you all know by now, I spent years being connected through media, but being connected to the world of talent mobility. Okay, in other words, sending people on assignment across state lines, or across country lines, across cultures. But now all that's changing, not only because of the impact of COVID, generational shift, and complexity in country, multiple country restrictions on inbound talent taking jobs away from quote unquote qualified locals. And that's happening right here in the US as well. So the world of global mobility, talent mobility, still exists, but it's changing and it's super expensive. So from a talent assessment point of view, before you guys would send out me on an assignment across border, across time, across cultures, is there a plan for me as the assignee with coaching assistance, mapping out, design thinking, the assignment process so that an ROI is measurable, not only for the company, but for the assignee and family that's being sent, and huge expense, probably $1 million, maybe more on a typical assignment, unless it's a short-term commuter type assignment. Paul, you have years of experience, not necessarily in mobility management, but pretty close to that. Would you like to comment on what I've just been babbling about?
No, it makes total sense. I was head of international human resources for Paramount Pictures, and it's different. It is a different beast. And to your point, it's changing very quickly because of the technology we have right now.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at Zoom, which didn't exist 20 years ago, all of a sudden, we don't necessarily have to send Paul Falcone to Europe or Asia or Latin America. We can just get him involved in that operation, but he can do it from the safety of his home in Los Angeles or whatever it happens to be. Tatiana, the work that you do, I think, lends itself very, very well to doing these global assessments, because so much of it isn't so much, is Paul going to fit in Europe versus Asia versus Latin America versus Africa? It's not that. It's, does he have the emotional awareness, the ability to communicate across cultures, a respect for other people? Does he have a style that's going to work well for him in a foreign environment? He's an agile person. He lands on his feet. He takes the right. That kind of thing, I would assume, Tatiana, for you, is really so much of what you can identify in doing the various assessments that you do. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So did anybody, Paul, looking back, turning the telescope around, looking back the other way, did anybody map out assignments for the assignee with mileposts or rest stops where coaching exists, and then performance review bit by bit rather than at the end, and then all of a sudden they say, hey, Ed, we spent $1 million on you, and what the hell? Where's the results? And goodbye.
No, Ed, it's a good question, and it depends on the business model. Entertainment, God love them, they're cheap. There's not a lot of money going into executive coaching and all of these support systems that you would expect. Normally, if an expat went abroad, they had a good relationship with their manager, they knew people in HR and then their home base, and that was the coaching that they got. They didn't have external sources, at least back in the day when I was at Paramount, when we were doing those things. Yet at the same time, in other organizations, when I think of a Fortune 500 kind of consumer products giant that's got offices all over the world, they probably got the infrastructure in place to say, if we identify Paul, he's going to need to take the assessments to see if it's a good fit. And then we would assign him a coach. And then we're going to have, benchmarks to find out how he's doing and what it looks like. So a lot of it depends on the industry and depends on their practices, and truthfully, it depends on their budget. But so yes, it does exist out there, Ed. But I do agree with you that that is changing very, very quickly, because the technology has changed to make the world a lot smaller, for lack of a better term.
So how can we, quote, we help corporate managers, mid-managers, learn how to do Zoom better, to show empathy or to understand what empathy is, and then express it somehow without looking like a jerk or looking phony?
Yeah, effective leadership communication does show itself across Zoom and Google Meets and whatever else you're using, right? Microsoft Teams. The reality is it has to be, I don't want to say it has to be in the person. Emotional intelligence is, unlike your IQ, your intellectual quotient, your emotional quotient, your EQ is something you can build like a muscle. You can become more aware. You can become more empathic or empathetic. You can become a better listener. It all depends on if you care, right? There's that expression that says people don't care what you know until they know that you care. How do you develop that muscle in your leadership team? And there ain't no rocket science to this stuff. You sit and you talk about it. That's what the staff meetings are for. That's what the one-on-one coaching meetings are for, is to talk about how to help prepare people for their next move in career progression here or anywhere else. And then how do we get it there? How do you rank yourself in that area in terms of otherness or selfless leadership? And why? And if you give yourself an 8, why are you an 8? And what would make you a 10? And there's your goal for the next quarter or the next 6 months or the next year. The employees, you've teased it out of them. You've been a good coach. You've asked them the right questions for them to identify their go forward plan, and ask them then to figure out what are the outcomes we're expecting, so that we'll know it's worked. But for me, the wise manager is going to push that down to their employees. I'm not going to tell them what they need to do. I'm going to try and tease it out of them, because 9 times out of 10, they're going to give me the same answer I was going to give them, but there's more ownership in it than when it's their own. And then if they're off a little bit, I can ask some sponsoring questions and just kind of get them back aligned with what I was going to give them the answer with in the first place. But I think that's the best way to do that. You can build emotional intelligence of individuals and of teams by talking to your groups a certain way and kind of getting them thinking about this stuff. Be surprised how quickly, it's like going to the gym. All of a sudden you've got muscles you didn't even know you had. It's a good feeling.
You know,
Gary,
talking about those muscles. Sorry, go ahead, Ed. Sorry.
no, you first.
I was just continuing the muscles. I read an article, and pardon me, I forgot the name of the Fortune 500 CEO. And the Fortune 500 CEO with mega locations across the country and the world. "I hate meetings," was the quote. And what he was saying in very little other detail is, we have gotten meeting heavy. There are not agendas. And my assumption is the meetings could all be done in half the time if you stopped to organize them, prioritize them, and decide who ought to be a part of them. And there was a follow-on on that. So I'm thinking of the skills as to how we do Zoom better, how we have agendas, and how we have who's going to speak on what. I mean, I go back to Tatiana's point. What is success? I don't think we as companies spend as much time as we should really knowing, again, what business we're in. You get the latest sexy fad, you get the latest sexy product or service that you might consider when 80 or 90% of your revenues come from A and B. And you're talking about C and D out there all the time. So as I think further about Tatiana's comment about what is success and what is that in terms of the skills of the leadership, I attended a conference here several years ago in China, and they had, in this alliance, they had several panels of Chinese execs. And the one thing that struck me the most out of all this was those that were very successful international companies had one area that they just worked on and worked on and worked on and hired against and developed against, and that was curiosity. So it said, I'm not satisfied with status quo. How can we do it better? How can we re-engineer it? How can we make our service or product better? So the curiosity piece, meaning you're never satisfied. You're that pain in the tush that said, look, that's not good enough. You know, if you Shark Tank edit what those little stories are all the time, the cost of customer acquisition, you know, and the cost to, you know, keep other people out, you know, what's your secret sauce? I mean, in the talent world, and we help execs get placed around the executive table. I want that executive to be a big value add. I don't want he or she just to be a me too and a kiss backside of the CEO and tell them how great they are. They need to be something different. They need to have their own viewpoint. And so getting that exec, getting 3 or 4 others that are the best, knowing what success is, knowing your best employees, your best execs, they're the ones I want to help hire the next ones. I mean, in a forced ranking situation, 1 through 10, I want those 1s and 2s to do most of the hiring, not the 9s and 10s, because the 9s and 10s they're lucky to be there. And they probably should be gone. I'm covering a bunch of topics, but the theme I'm really focused on with leadership, what makes your company successful? And which executives have that? And go train against that, have those guys and gals with Tatiana help with the training and the coaching. I think that makes a huge difference when companies are going to be successful.
I want to turn the conversation a little bit, and I seek advice from all of you, each of you. Doesn't have to be online right now, but I want to put this out. Gary, yesterday you and I had a brief talk about this program and the concept of audience. Who's the audience? What audience do you want to reach by taking time, valuable time to be here on the screen? So I had a restless night because I was thinking about that and, you know, how do I generate money to pay bills doing this show? I love this. It's not work. So it's all about audience. Okay. If I can deliver an audience to you guys, you're going to want to do this more. I know that. So, Gary, who should I send this program to, the recorded edition, tomorrow, and start using my link? Yeah, I've got like 1.2 million connections on LinkedIn, and some are stronger than others, that's for sure. But I have a hardcore of 500,000.
Let's do a speed round on this with the 6 of us here. I would send it to private equity firms, number 1.
I'm writing this down now. You know, I'm old school.
Stephen, who would you send it to? Let's just do a speed round on this without a lot of dialogue here for a minute or two.
Well, it gets back to the key question, who's your audience? I mean, that could be that. You've got the mobility industry. I would also suggest getting a list of Silicon Valley. I mean, look at people who have money. Profitable companies are going to be more willing to invest. And also, I'd take it from Eve. Eve's comment earlier that whatever it was, the 90-something% of businesses in America are small businesses. So if you can get those people interested in viewing as well as participating.
Paul, who would you send it to?
Hashtag small business, because I think that's really where this is going to be probably the most fertile ground. Hashtag small business has about 800,000 followers last I looked on LinkedIn. I think that's a really strong place for this to be.
Eve, where would you send it?
They took all my notes. So yes, small business owners throughout the United States. Also, anybody that has anything to do with SHRM, that's the Society for Human Resources Management, any other human resources, leadership, membership organizations out there, they will immediately recognize Paul Falcone's mug and want to follow whatever it is that he's doing. And I'm not just saying that because he paid me.
Tatiana?
Maybe a little broad, but yes, we need to engage decision makers. So people who are operational leaders, hiring managers, business owners, who make business decisions and human decisions in the workplace, and they need help.
I would also add, you've got associations, but also where do small business people hang out? Is it Rotary? Is it the Kiwanis Club? Is it their local business council, whatever it might be, development councils, and small government, city governments who, are often particularly trying to build tourism, like in Orlando. I'm sure there's a Orlando Tourist Promotion Board. Las Vegas has a tourist promotion board.
And there's Visit Orlando organization.
There it is, Visit Orlando. Yeah.
I haven't gotten involved with them yet. I'm still new to the area.
That's not the audience I care about, to be contrarian here. I'm B2B. I am fast-growing emerging companies, sure, but middle-sized public and private companies, Fortune 100 companies. My fees on trying to put a senior exec or a C-level person into a company are in that 50 to 100 to 150K range. Ma and pa owner of small business isn't my audience, Ed. I'm just going to say, if you're trying to really hire against success criteria, I think it's going to take a certain mass, Tatiana, rather than 90% of the US business, which is small business owners. That's not my target.
No, that's valid. That's valid. But somebody said earlier, use the word hashtag, and I think that's the other thing here is as you think about it, as you post on LinkedIn, use some hashtags. I see when you often post, you mention us, and then most of us try to repost it for your benefit as well as the benefit of all of us. But using hashtags is a great idea in that, because people do just follow those hashtags. And Instagram might be the other one. I'm surprised how much people I talk to are on Instagram for business purposes. It was very revealing to me. Just in the last couple of months, people I've talked to more and more saying, yeah, I get a lot of my business contacts. I get a lot of my business news. I get a lot of my business information through Instagram, which just it shocked the heck out of me.
If I'm in those mid to large companies, I've got required reading to be, Paul, some of your books. Stephen, I don't know as much about your books, but when I think about companies and how you're going to do business, I can remember my first few days at Citibank and Security Pacific years ago when I worked for them. Integrity, honesty, how you make decisions. And they introduced the key dude from audit. And any of you in this room that has stated something incorrect, not factual, or it's a lie, you're going to see this guy in about 3 to 4 weeks, because he's going to fire you. He's going to bring a box, you're going to pack your stuff, and you're going to be gone. The guy I was sitting next to, who was going to be our number 2 person in our $800 million division in the finance part of it, was contacted about 3 to 4 weeks later. I got the call first because I headed up HR, and they said, look, we're going to visit so-and-so. I said, why? He's awesome. We love him. He said, yes, but he's a liar. He's 3 hours short of a degree. What a dummy. So integrity, honesty, our headlines are everywhere, right? About bad guys and crooks doing stuff in politics, of course, or in business. Man, that ethics world, how to be honest, how to do that. That's my soapbox for the moment.
And real quick before I wrap, I would also suggest IFA. A lot of the traction we've been getting is in the franchise world, and those are with franchisors. And there's thousands and thousands of franchisors out there. And I'm not just talking like McDonald's and Chick-fil-A, talking Snap-on Tools and Aquatots and things like that. That's also your audience, because people that are on this call would be well received by those leaders, both on the executive level in the franchisor world and also on the smaller level in the franchisee world.
That's very, very helpful. Paul, when you talked about hashtags, do I make one up or do I go to a resource where they're already listed?
Ed, that's a good question. LinkedIn used to make it so easy because you can say hashtag CEOs or hashtag small business, and it would tell you how many followers it had, 80,000, 800,000, or 8 million. They don't do that anymore. So now, yeah, Google has a hashtag tool. I've tried to play with it, but without paying for it, it gave me limited results. So I just use the ones that I'm most comfortable with, and we can talk offline. I can give you some suggestions if you'd like.
Right. So if I do hashtag HR, that all 10 million will show up.
30 million.
30 million.
It's big.
then
Now,
you do-
hashtag HR management is going to be smaller than that. So, you know, Ed, there's different degrees of this. Sometimes you don't want too broad. Sometimes
Right.
you want to chisel it a little bit, but yeah, I can help you with that. So,
All right, I'll be back to you. Thank you for being on my show again. I really appreciate it. And
Thanks,
if you come up with other ideas of who I should send this program to, now's the time to announce your website if you want to do that, Tatiana.
Greatpeoplemanagement.com.
Great. Stephen?
humaneleadership.com.
Gary, do you care?
I sure care. SangerAssociates.com. And you know, all the high potentials in the world, and whether you're in a 10-person operation or a 1,000,000-person operation, those that want more, want to be paid more, want to get promoted, it's a huge audience across a big variety of companies. And those high potentials that want to learn more, they want to get better. You know, I think any one of us on this call could help that person a great deal.
Thank you so much. So some of you are going to be on this international business relations program I'm doing on September 26th. It started out to be a Scandinavia HR event, and I do have several involved from Scandinavia. And there'll be more joining because I've been blessed with some really strong people in Sweden, in particular in Stockholm and Malmo, Sweden. Malmo is a suburb of Copenhagen, in case you didn't know that. And Sweden is huge. It's vertical. Stockholm is up here, and Malmo is here, and right next to it is Copenhagen. But a lot of people are not familiar with that map. So it's a huge metro area. But then I decided it's too difficult to get people to want to go to Malmo in the Quality View Hotel and show up at my meeting in person, and therefore expensive to get there and stay there. And the Swedish kroner, or whatever it's called, is valued at 10 cents on the dollar, which means if I charge 100 US for a seat, and that includes lunch, it's actually 1,000 krona. Okay, so I was told point blank, forget about it. You're not going to make any money doing that. So why not just do it all virtual and open it up to the world so that the Scandinavian people on your program can do business with eventually with your friends in LA and New York and Orlando or wherever. And so that's what I'm doing now. And it's created a burst of energy from good people like yourselves and Sergey Gorbatov, PhD, who's based now in Madrid. He's tied in with AbbVie, but he's independent. He's going to be one of our speakers as well. And from Helsinki, PhD from Oxford, Michael Gates, is living in Helsinki, and he's going to be on the program as well. So it's really interesting. And we're going to do a whole series of these geographically based talk shows virtually in Mideast, in Africa, India, across Europe, Latin America. Latin America is on August 7th, which is next week. And more about that later. Thank you all for being on Global TV again. Come back.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Ed.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks,
Bye,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody. Great to see everybody again.
Great
All
to
right,
see you.
likewise. Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.